Planet Terror is about a zombie outbreak that starts by Osama going around and then murdering women. The entire town starts to get affected by this virus. Death-proof. Some guy has a bag of testicles for some reason in the car, and the path of the car gets killed. Well, Grindhouse is today's film from 2007. It's actually a dual film project released theatrically, both as two films together and separately. That would be Robert Rodriguez's Planet Terror and Quentin Tarantino's... Are you getting that stomach sound in there, by the way? Quentin Tarantino's Death Proof. There's also these really cool fake trailers in between the two films, two of which were actually made into feature films, Machete and Hobo with a Shotgun. Hobo with a Shotgun seems to only be in the Canadian versions of the film. My favorite of those is Edgar Wright's contribution. Edgar Wright, of course, is partially responsible for movies like Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. Rob Zombie's contribution is Wolf Women of the SS, which is kind of almost like a reference to several different types of films, but specifically Nazi exploitation. And then Eli Roth jumps in the mix with a really cool idea of a Thanksgiving horror film, but of course he can't help himself, and there's just like more gore in 90 seconds than the whole, 180-minute film. The film was a critical success at the time, but it seems to have gone over many people's heads also because it was not a commercial success. Although, over time, it seems to have found its audience and, it's being discovered a bit more and more time has passed for us to kind of observe it. So Rodriguez's section, Planet Terror, deals with the zombie outbreak. Yes, that again. And, people banding together to try to overcome their obstacles. And then Tarantino's section is called Death Proof, which is about this stunt driver who is intent on just killing women nondescriptly, and he's built a car that's, of course, death-proof. Some actors and their respective characters actually appear in both films, such as Michael Parks. Tarantino himself turns up a good 2 or 3 times in the movie with very extended cameos, and you get some of the Tarantino regulars, such as Kurt Russell or Mr. Baldy Smirks himself, Bruce Willis. Marley Shelton is one of the main characters of Planet Terror, and I feel like just her look is just kind of perfect at that kind of like constant deer in the headlights sort of look. But when Rodriguez starts putting family members in the film, it starts to kind of take me out of it, as well as the sort of head-scratching choice of putting Fergie in there for 2 or 3 minutes. My first big nitpick about the movie is the fact that I feel like it should have just been set in the 1970s, since that's when these Grindhouse movies were coming out anyway. It kind of takes me out of the film in that in both films there's a scene where some sort of exposition is delivered, but through cell phone, and this is like 2007, so phones from 10 years ago look like a rotary phone at this point. And it's not as if it would change the plot very much, it just seems like a strange decision to put it in modern day when everything else about it feels very vintage. There's even lines of dialogue that sound like they would be in the 70s, like somebody saying, "Hey, I saw you on a billboard," or, "That hippie over there?" But then 2 seconds later, it's like, "That skanky bitch," or referencing The Rock. And although I'll admit The Rock will probably never go out of style and he's probably the next president, it's still, why? There's much more exploitation in the first bit, which on a certain level kind of conveys the Grindhouse feel much more with gruesome gore. You even get the gratuitous sex scene, and I like how they play with the form, and the film reel runs out, or it's like missing reel here. But if you're actually really, really trying to make something seem like it's an exploitative movie from the 70s, you probably have to have a lot more pointless padding and kind of like long, drawn-out scenes, which, in a way, especially in the first half of Death Proof, you got a lot of scenes like that. And the music in Death Proof is actually probably more legitimate more of the time. It's a lot of vintage soul cuts and stuff to be expected from most of Tarantino's projects. Although I did like the fact that Nouvelle Vogue's cover of the Dead Kennedys' Too Drunk to Fuck is in Planet Terror. Planet Terror. It kind of just feels like a self-congratulatory circle jerk at a certain point. I feel like all the movie posters and the bar at the beginning of Death Proof is kind of distracting. This film is full of all sorts of references to all different films and actors and things, and most of it, you don't necessarily need to know in order to understand the film, but there's kind of a lot of like little inside nods and chuckles and stuff to those who are paying attention. Ho, Fu Manchu, I get it, like the castle of Fu Manchu. Right. Hey, good looking, I'll be back to pick you up later. It's quite hard to critique a film like this. First of all, because it's so self-aware and it's almost like it's trying to achieve this perfect imperfection. At the same time, it's supposed to all kind of be an homage to sleazy exploitation film, or as I like to call it, cinema visceral. So I guess in a way, Planet Terror is the one that has the most immediate resonance, but Death Proof has the long-term resonance. I really like how there's awkward sound skipping and editing. I could have even used more of that. There should have been more of those like awkward 70s like stationary camera pulling in. So yeah, all in all, I would say Tarantino was more successful in capturing the vibe of the exploitation movies. It's much more pondering, slow-moving, directionless. I would say to the Planet Terror film's credit, there's a lot more, character plot points and character arcs that are set up and paid off than in the second film, because in that one we kind of have one cast of characters for the first half and then a completely different one in the second half. So I would say if I had to pit the two together, I would say Planet Terror was definitely more entertaining, definitely more the type of one that you would want to show to a group of people after you've been drinking. And it pulls no punches, showing all sorts of gore and violence. I'm sure Tarantino could not wait to be the guy who gets stabbed in the eye twice. And unfortunately, if these films aren't viewed as separate, entities, I think inevitably everyone's going to kind of find the second one to be a bit of a letdown, because this first one is such high-octane action and gore and everything, and the second one just, it's a Tarantino movie, lots of scenes of characters sitting around talking that doesn't really advance the plot necessarily. I gotta say though, it's the little things that really make the difference for me and really make me enjoy it. Particularly out of all the between the film fake commercials and things, I really like the ad for the Tex-Mex. I almost feel though, like even then, the title cards could have just stayed on the screen for an uncomfortably long and awkward amount of time. So my main takeaway really is that it looks like it was very fun to make. Most of the time it's fun to watch as well. It still manages to be not as over the top as Four Rooms. It's a slight achievement. It's some fun, if not unnecessary. Kind of have to be in the mood. I would even argue that the films probably both work better on their own. No social or political commentary going on here really, just good old-fashioned fun, which on its own, like, hey, I can get behind that. So yeah, hard to categorize, and definitely not my first choice in the film canon of Robert Rodriguez or Tarantino. You gotta watch the classics first, like Spy Kids. And that there is the review for Grindhouse. So do me a favor and stay sexy!